I came home that afternoon with the best news of my life tucked inside my chest like a secret about to burst open. My uncle's lawyer had called me at noon, while I was still at my desk at the accounting firm. He'd asked me to come in right away. I'd sat across from him in that beige office on Yonge Street, watching his mouth move, trying to understand that my uncle, a quiet man who collected hockey cards and drove a 15-year-old Civic, had left me his entire share portfolio and the lake house in Muskoka, $420,000 in registered accounts, plus the property, free and clear. I'd sat in my car in the parking garage for 20 minutes just breathing. I kept thinking about how I was going to tell my husband. He'd been so stressed lately about the renovation costs on our house, the one we'd bought together 4 years ago in Barrie, the one that needed a new roof and a furnace by October. I thought this news would fix everything. I thought I was driving home to save us. My mother-in-law's Subaru was in the driveway when I pulled up. That wasn't unusual. She lived 40 minutes away in Orillia and showed up whenever she felt like it. My husband had given her a key before we were even married. I'd never been asked. She called it being family. I called it a lot of things I kept to myself, but when I walked through the front door, something was wrong. They were both standing in the living room, which nobody ever did. My husband had his arms crossed. My mother-in-law was holding a manila envelope against her chest like a shield, the kind of envelope you get from a lawyer's office. The beige kind, the serious kind. My husband looked at me and said, "Good, you're home, we need to talk. Not hi, not how was your drive. We need to talk." I set my bag down by the door. I still had my coat on. "Your name isn't on the mortgage," he said. "It never was. You know that." I did know that. It had been his house before we met, and when we married, we'd talked about adding my name, but it kept getting delayed. His idea to delay, always something, the bank appointment, the paperwork, next month, next month. I'd trusted that. I'd been paying half the bills for 4 years and trusted that. "I've spoken to a lawyer," he said, "and I've listed the house." The room went very quiet. "I'm sorry," I said. My mother-in-law straightened up. She had this look she got when she was pleased with herself, like she'd just won an argument at a book club. "He's moving on, sweetheart, it's time. We thought it was better to handle this cleanly." "We," she said, "we." My husband held out the envelope. "These are separation papers. The listing went live this morning. I've already had 2 showings booked. You have 30 days. I looked at him for a long time. This man I had driven through a January ice storm to bring soup to when he had the flu. This man I had helped move 3 times before we bought that house. This man who called his mother every single day. I took the envelope, and then I smiled. Not the polite kind, not the nervous kind women smile when they're trying not to cry in front of someone who's hurting them. A real smile. Because standing in that living room, holding those papers, I had just realized something that neither of them understood yet. "What's so funny?" my mother-in-law said. Her voice had that edge it got when something wasn't going the way she'd planned. "Nothing," I said, "nothing at all." I set the envelope on the side table, still unopened. I went to the kitchen and poured myself a glass of water. I heard them whispering behind me in the living room. I heard my husband say, "I told you she'd be weird about it." I drank my water slowly. I looked out the window at the backyard, at the garden I'd planted the first summer we were here, the raised beds I'd built myself with lumber from Home Depot and YouTube tutorials. Then I went upstairs, sat on the edge of our bed and called my lawyer. Not a separation lawyer. My own lawyer, the one who had just finished walking me through my uncle's estate 2 hours earlier. I'd been his client for 3 years. I called him and I told him what had just happened and I asked him one specific question. He answered it. And that was the moment I understood that my husband had made a very serious mistake. Here is what he didn't know. 8 months before that afternoon, I had found something on our joint laptop that I wasn't supposed to find. My husband had been logged into his email and hadn't closed it, and his mother's name was right at the top of the inbox with a subject line that said the plan for the house. I am not a person who reads other people's emails. I want to say that clearly. I closed the laptop and I went for a long walk around the neighborhood and I told myself it was nothing. It was about the renovation. It was normal. But I couldn't stop thinking about the phrase "the plan for the house." So I started paying attention. I am an accountant. I have been doing this work for 12 years. I know what financial patterns look like when they are normal, and I know what they look like when someone is trying to make a paper trail disappear. And over the next few weeks, things started to look very wrong. Money was moving in a way that didn't make sense. He'd opened a new personal savings account I only found out about by accident when a statement came in the mail addressed to him alone. He'd cashed out the TFSA we'd been contributing to together, the one we talked about as our emergency fund, without telling me. $41,000. Gone. He'd had the house assessed. I found the appraiser's card in his jacket pocket when I took it to the dry cleaners. I am not a dramatic person. I don't make scenes. What I did instead was make a file. A quiet, organized file the way I would for any client. Copies of statements, screenshots, dates, notes with times and sources. I stored everything on a personal cloud account he didn't know existed, with a password I'd never shared with anyone. And then I called a family law lawyer in Toronto, and I made an appointment and I went by myself on a Tuesday afternoon, and I learned everything I needed to know about property rights in Ontario, about spousal claims, about what the law actually said regardless of whose name was on a deed. The lawyer was very clear with me. Ontario's Family Law Act doesn't care whose name is on the mortgage. What it cares about is the matrimonial home. The home we live in together as spouses. That home, no matter who paid for it, no matter whose name is on title, cannot be sold without both spouses' written consent. Both, even in a separation, even in a divorce. It cannot be listed, it cannot close, not without my signature. My husband had listed a house he could not legally sell. I drank my glass of water in that kitchen, knowing that the 2 showings he'd booked that morning were both headed for a wall. That every single person who walked through that front door with a real estate agent was going to fall in love with a house that could not change hands. That the listing would eventually have to be pulled. That any deposit taken in the meantime could create serious legal liability for him and his agent both. I finished my water. I rinsed the glass. I went back to the living room. I'm going to need a few days, I said, to go through the papers. My mother-in-law looked at my husband like she was waiting for him to push harder. He said, "The 30 days starts from today, so—" "I know when 30 days starts," I said. "I'm an accountant." I smiled at her. She didn't like it. I stayed in the house. I want to be clear about that. I unpacked my coat and I made dinner and I slept in our bed and I went to work the next morning like nothing had happened. My husband slept in the guest room, his choice, not mine. He started getting impatient within the first week. He'd bought the house for $300,000 6 years ago, before we were married, and the appraiser he'd quietly commissioned had put it at $610,000 in the current market. He had a number in his head. He was planning something with that number. I didn't know exactly what, but the account his mother had helped him open in January told me enough. He and his mother had talked about this for a long time. That was clear to me. The timing, the lawyer, the listing, none of it was impulsive. He had been planning to sell this house, pocket the equity, and leave me with 30 days' notice and no claim to any of it. What he hadn't planned for was me. By day 10, his real estate agent had received a formal letter from my lawyer explaining the situation. The listing was pulled 2 days later. His lawyer called. There were several phone calls I was not part of. Then there was a night where he came home and sat at the kitchen table looking like someone had let the air out of him. "You went to a lawyer," he said. "I went to a lawyer," I said. "I was making tea." I offered him a cup. He didn't answer. "The listing can't close without my signature," I said, "which you would have known if you'd spoken to a better lawyer." His mother came over the next morning. I heard them in the kitchen before I came downstairs. I made myself walk slowly. I am not a person who performs calm. That morning, I was actually calm. There is a difference. She looked at me with genuine dislike when I came into the kitchen. "You're making this very difficult," she said. "I'm protecting my legal rights," I said, "which I'm entitled to do. He paid for that house. His name is on it. That equity is his. That's not what Ontario law says," I said. "Your son's lawyer will explain it to him in more detail, I'm sure." She started to say something else and I poured my coffee and took it upstairs and let them have the kitchen. That afternoon I called the one person I'd kept all of this from. My best friend. We'd known each other since our first year at Carleton, lived in Ottawa now, worked in government policy. She was the kind of person who didn't panic. When I told her everything, the emails, the account, the listing, my uncle's estate, all of it, there was a long silence on the phone. Then she said, "So what are you going to do?" "I'm going to take what I'm owed," I said, "and I'm going to do it correctly." She said, "Good. Here is what I hadn't told my husband yet. My uncle's estate had cleared. The $420,000 was sitting in my name, in accounts that were mine alone, protected as inherited property under the Family Law Act. Inherited assets received in your own name are not subject to equalization in Ontario. They were mine before the marriage ended, and they would be mine after. His plan had been to sell the house, keep the equity, and leave me with nothing. What he didn't know was that I didn't need the equity. I never had. I had been quietly solvent in a way he didn't understand because he'd never really asked. But I was entitled to equalization under the law. Half the increase in value of the matrimonial home during our marriage. We'd bought it together emotionally, lived in it together, built something in it together. He'd taken out a line of credit against it for a renovation that I had also contributed to with cash. My name wasn't on the title, but my fingerprints were everywhere in that house. My lawyer filed the equalization claim. The number, once his financial disclosures came in, was significant. The TFSA money he'd cashed out without telling me, that mattered. The account he'd opened with his mother, that mattered. The timing of his actions relative to my inheritance, a lawyer looking at those dates could argue a lot of things. The night the formal disclosure documents arrived at his lawyer's office, my husband called me at work. I let it go to voicemail. He called again, then again. I finished my meeting. I called back in the parking garage. "Why didn't you tell me?" he said. His voice was strange, tight and flat at the same time. "Tell you what," I said, "about the inheritance, about your uncle." "I was going to," I said. "The day I came home and you handed me separation papers." The silence on the other end of the phone lasted a long time. "So you knew," he said, "when you smiled. You already knew." "I knew something," I said. "I didn't know everything, but I knew enough." He hung up. I sat in my car for a few minutes. The same parking garage, same fluorescent lights buzzing somewhere above me, a different feeling this time. Something that wasn't quite satisfaction but was in the same neighborhood. The next months were not simple, I won't pretend they were. Separation is a long process, even when you have a good lawyer and a clear case, and I had both. There were difficult meetings and stressful emails, and one court date where I sat across a table from my mother-in-law and watched her try to speak to her son with her eyes in a way she thought I couldn't see. I saw everything, I always had. The house sold eventually. It sold at $618,000, which was higher than the appraisal. My husband could not close without my consent, and my consent required a settlement agreement. The settlement agreement my lawyer negotiated included my equalization claim, a division of shared assets, and a clause about the TFSA funds he'd withdrawn without disclosure. I signed the day before the scheduled closing. I was given a certified check. My mother-in-law did not look at me as she left the lawyer's office. My husband looked at me once, just once, at the door, and I think he was trying to understand how this had happened. How a conversation that was supposed to take 30 seconds and end with me packing boxes had turned into this. I don't know what he thought he saw in my face that afternoon. I wasn't performing anything. I wasn't gloating. I was just a woman who had done her paperwork. I bought a condo in Barrie with a view of Kempenfelt Bay, third floor, south-facing, with big windows that fill up with light by 8 in the morning. I moved in on a Friday in March. My best friend drove up from Ottawa and we ate pizza on the floor because I didn't have a table yet, and we watched the lake go dark through those big windows, and I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Like the walls around me actually belonged to me. My name on the title, my name alone. The next spring I planted a container garden on my balcony. Tomatoes, basil, a small rosebush that took 3 weeks to bloom. I thought about the raised beds I'd left behind at the house in Barrie, the ones I'd built myself, that first summer, full of something that looked like hope. I don't miss them. I built better ones. My uncle's portrait sits on my bookshelf now. A small photo from a family Christmas years ago, him in a reindeer sweater, grinning like he'd gotten away with something. He was a quiet man. He drove a 15-year-old Civic. He collected hockey cards and he grew up watching the Leaf Zoos, and he never once made a show of having anything. But he knew what he was doing when he left it to me. I think he knew exactly what he was doing. I raised my coffee cup at that photo on the morning I got my license renewed with my new address. I raised it the way you'd raise a glass to someone who timed things perfectly. I said, "Good call, Uncle," and I meant every word.